All right, everyone. Thank you for coming back this afternoon. I've been asked to kick off your conferencing time this afternoon by teaching you on this issue of leading major change. And I'd like to do that. We're going to do this for about the next hour or so. I have written a book called Leading Major Change in Your Ministry. I'm not here to sell books today, but if that book is helpful to you, I would recommend it to you as well. And what I'll be teaching you today is about one half of two different chapters of that 250-page book. So it's just a snapshot of some aspect of it today. Now, for those of you who may not know my background on this, let me introduce to you what I mean when I say major change. Major change is when you have the need to lead your church or organization to a dramatic, remarkable, different moment in its history that you would call a significant or major change. I'm not talking about incremental change. I'm not talking about tweaking the order of worship for next Sunday. I'm talking about something that will forever change the nature and character and direction of your ministry. So, for example, in my lifetime of ministry leadership, here are some of what I've experienced. In my first pastorate, two major changes. The first one was leading a family-style church to start a second morning worship service and in every way redefine how it saw itself as a church. Second, that same church, we purchased 10 acres of property and initiated a relocation that was ultimately concluded after actually under the next pastor ultimately concluded. But today that church is on that new 10-acre site, attendance about 400 and thriving still today in that location. My first church, moving from a family-style chapel to a people-reaching movement, emphasizing two services as the crucial public change that had to come to our church. And then, of course, the relocation of that church as well. I moved to the Pacific Northwest, planted a church, pastored it for a number of years, and then was asked to become the executive director of the Northwest Baptist Convention. And in that convention, the major change was, again, twofold. The first one was, on the day that I was elected, the convention broke ground on a new convention and seminary facility in partnership with Golden Gate Seminary for the Pacific Northwest. And so my first day on the job, I stepped into the stream of having to build this new identity for us in a new location. But that really wasn't our biggest change. Our biggest change was we were a 1950s style top-down denominational model, and we had to reinvent into what I called a field-based strategy, where strategy was generated by the churches and resourced by the convention. And that was a dramatic change for the Northwest Baptist Convention. Then I went to the seminary and, of course, led the change, which ultimately resulted in the book and other things. But when I arrived at the seminary in 2004, I knew that there was a ticking time clock that was going to expire in 2009, and it was the 25-year entitlements that we had for the development of our campus in Northern California. That was the second 25-year cycle we had lived through. We had been in that location for 50 years, but our future development options were going to end in 2010, and so in 2009, 2010, we brought forward a plan to redevelop our campus, and we lost big. We were denied all opportunity for future development of the campus, which meant that we had to make a very significant redirection in our strategy. And you can read this in the book. 7 miracles happened, but the first one was a person walking into my office and offering to buy the campus that cannot be developed. That's not registering with you. Okay, let me tell you how it works. This is 2026 or 2025. Last year, 2024, I went back to the Bay Area for a memorial service, drove out to the old campus, It's still sitting there in the exact condition we left it in 2016. The names of the faculty are still stenciled on their old parking places. The property cannot be developed. The roofs are falling in on the buildings. And yet a gentleman gave me $86 million cash to walk away. And he owns it today. Of course, he also owns 400,000 acres in North America and is the 25th largest private landowner in our country. And he told me, I'm going to let it sit here for 10 years and then we'll figure out what to do. I led the seminary to relocate. Now, let me put that in perspective for you. On the day we announced we were relocating, we had 150 employees, 2,000 students, and we picked that seminary up and we moved it 400 miles and started over in a new location. Everyone that was employed, their spouse quit their jobs, their kids were taken out of school, they sold their houses, and we picked up and we moved and started over in a new location. Am I communicating yet about major change? I'm not talking about moving the offering from before the sermon to after the after the invitation. Those are incremental changes, and you need to make those. But I'm talking about major change, where you say we have to change from being a family chapel to being a regional church that reaches people. We're having to move our location, sell our property, and go to another place as a church. Or we're having to reinvent our church in terms of its ministry philosophy, like I did at the convention. Or we're having to change locations entirely and start over like we did at the seminary. Major change. Now, in this conference time today, I want to do two things. I want to spend about 10 minutes now showing you a model of how to preach and teach about major change. And then I want to spend the rest of my time teaching you a diagnostic tool that you can use yourself and with your leaders to determine if your organization really does need to make a major change. So, first of all, a model for preaching and teaching. Let's just skip this good part here. Okay, let's go to this part right here. Wait a minute here, let's back up. Oh, you know what? This is not the backup button. That's the backup button. See, don't pay any attention up here right now because I can lead the Southern Baptist Convention Executive Committee, but I obviously can't operate basic technology. All right. Let's talk about how to preach and teach on this issue. A good model for this is Matthew chapter 9, verses 9 through 15. Jesus introduces in this story two principles about change, but prior to that, there are three vignettes, or three short stories, which I often wondered when I first started studying these two principles that Jesus teaches, why these three stories are juxtaposed with these two principles. But ultimately, I came to understand it, and I'd like to show you this morning what I've discovered. Jesus inaugurates his kingdom is the big change that's being introduced. And Jesus shows how people are responding to this inauguration, starting in verse 9. As Jesus went on from there, he saw a man named Matthew sitting at the tax office, and he said to him, "Follow me." And he got up and followed him. Now, if I'm preaching on this subject of major change, I would say to the church family something like this. This is how simple it can be. Jesus is inaugurating his kingdom, and he says to Matthew, "Follow me." And what does Matthew do? Follows him. Leading major change and living through major change is this simple. Hear Jesus, follow him. In fact, say it with me. Hear Jesus, follow him. Say it again. Hear Jesus, follow him. One more time. Hear Jesus, follow him. I call this the Matthew model of major change. Hear Jesus, follow him. But the next two stories illustrate the ways that people often react to major change. The next one is beginning in verse 10. While he was reclining at the table in the house, many tax collectors and sinners came to eat with Jesus and his disciples. When the Pharisees saw this, they asked his disciples, "Why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners?" When he heard this, he said, "Well, it's because those who are well, it is not those who are well who need a doctor, but those who are sick." Now, we often get caught up in this story in thinking about the exchange, but this is in the context of major change, which Jesus is about to teach on in the later verses. What's happening here? The Pharisees illustrate for us how many people respond to a major change. The Pharisees illustrate too much is changing too fast. They said, why do your people eat with tax collectors and sinners? Don't they know the rules? We have spent centuries writing these bylaws. And I'm telling you, these bylaws are inviolable and they cannot be changed. You never heard anything like that in a Baptist church? The Pharisees saw change coming, but it was too much, too fast. Too many rules were being broken, too much was being done too dramatically. And then Jesus takes us to a third group, a lesser known group. Verse 14. Then John's disciples came to him saying, why do we and the Pharisees fast, but your disciples do not fast? Jesus said, well, can the wedding guests be sad while the groom is with them? The time will come when the groom will be taken away from them, and then they will fast. Now, who are these guys? These are the disciples of John the Baptist. These are your classic early adopters. They saw things changing, and they said, I'm in with that. And when Jesus came along and his people went to a banquet, what did they say? What is wrong with your people, Jesus? Seriously, you need to get your people up to speed. We are fasting. We're serious people. We follow a guy that wore sackcloth, that wore a camel hair garment and ate locusts. Your people are going to banquets. What's their illustration? John's disciples are the people who complain not enough is changing fast enough. Now watch this. When I'm preaching and teaching on this, I say to people, we want to be like Matthew, hear Jesus and follow him. But the hard reality is all of us typically fall into these two categories. Sometimes we are upset because too much is changing too fast, and other times we are upset because not enough is changing fast enough. And one of the things that you make a mistake doing when you preach and teach on this is if you then attack people for being in one camp or the other. Listen, every one of us can be in either camp depending on the issue, including you. You say, not me, I embrace change. No, you don't. You embrace change you like or embrace change you initiate. You do not embrace change that's thrust upon you. You can be just as stubborn as anybody else, right? So when I preach and teach on this, I don't try to create adversarial moments. I try to create we're all in this together moments. And I'll give you just one illustration. You get your own illustration. But here's mine. I can be a Pharisee or a John's disciple. And I will tell you about that because of the designated hitter rule. In 1973, the American League adopted the abomination known as the designated hitter rule. And from 1973 until about 3 years ago, the American League played beer league softball while the National League played baseball like God intended it to be played. And then, about 3 years ago, the National League lost their minds and adopted the designated hitter rule, and my grandchildren will not be able to grow up seeing baseball played as it was intended from the foundations of the universe. Now, when I say that, some of you in the back were shouting amen, and some of you are thinking, why am I here? Okay? The point is, if it matters to you, you can be a Pharisee. If you want it to change, you can be one of John's disciples. So what I've tried to do is give illustrations from my personal experience that show how I have found myself in either camp depending on the issue. Brothers and sisters, we are not helping ourselves by creating adversarial moments when we start talking about change. We have to understand that we're all in this together. Change is hard for everyone, and major change is going to be particularly difficult. And as a leader, you're initiating the change, so I'm assuming you're for it. You've already had time to process through everything going on about needing to make this change, so you're emotionally prepared for it, but you've got a lot of people listening to you talk who maybe are engaging the idea for the very first time. So, right, we want to preach and teach on this in a way that creates models from the Bible and helps people understand what it means to enter into a time of real change. And then Jesus teaches these two famous principles. in verses 17 and 18, or 16 and 17. Jesus says, "No one patches an old garment with unshrunk cloth because the patch pulls away from the garment and makes the tear worse. And no one puts new wine into old wineskins, otherwise the skins burst, the wine spills out, and the skins are ruined." Jesus here teaches, oh, good grief, I'm supposed to be PowerPointing. By the way, if you want this PowerPoint, I'll leave it. You guys can have it. Tim, you can distribute it however you choose, or if you choose not to, that's fine too. But this is all, I'll give you this when it's over. It's fine with me. Now, so Jesus calls for major change. The first one is the illustration of the cloth, and the principle is this: no patches. Major change means major change, no patches. Now, this illustration needs some more explanation because it's not as common as the wineskin one is. Even in a Baptist group, the people here know about the wine thing. Man, you're a tough crowd. That's supposed to be funny. Now, come on. All right? But the first illustration, Jesus said, no one, when you want to make a garment for a 3-year-old child in the first century, you first sheared a sheep, then you wove the cloth, or then you spun the thread, then you wove the cloth, then you made the garment. Then the child wore it, you took it down to the river, you beat it on a rock, brought it back, put it on the kid. You did this 10 times, and this thing's going to shrink, right? And Jesus said, after you've done that, you don't take a piece of new cloth, put it on an old garment, because the first time you wash it, it's going to shrink differently, and you're going to have a worse mess than you had in the first place, right? That's the illustration. So here's the point. Jesus said, sometimes a patch won't do. Now, I'm all about patching. Incremental change is good. Don't misunderstand me. When I was in my first pastorate, our church started growing. And so we made incremental change. We moved some Sunday school classes around. We brought in some temporary dividers in our fellowship hall. We dragged up 2 of the nastiest old trailer houses you've ever seen and converted those into Sunday school rooms. We put chairs up in our auditorium to squeeze every person in we could. We opened the doors and put people in the foyer. Now, this wasn't a mega church. I'm trying to go from 100 to 200, okay, 100 to 150, and we're doing all this. But finally, we got to the point where we had no more room. And I had been talking with our deacons about this, and we'd been working on it for months. And finally, I went to a deacons meeting. I said, fellas, this morning, we did not have an empty seat in our worship center, not one empty seat. They're like, yeah, that's exciting, Pastor. And I said, that's right. And I'm going to need some of you guys to either stay home or go to a different church, because I'm still inviting lost people, and there's no place for them to sit down. We've patched all we can patch. And I know how hard it is for you to hear this, but I really think we need to think hard about 2 worship services. And one of the deacons who understood what I was saying said, but Pastor, we've always been one big family as a church. If we go to 2 services, there's going to be people in our church, we won't even know who they are. And I said, that's right. I'm asking you to move from being a family chapel to being a movement of people coming to Jesus. And he said, I hear that. It's going to be hard for us, but I don't know any other option at this point. You understand what I'm saying here? Incremental change was good. We made incremental change for like 3 years trying to solve this problem and finally ran out of options. And I had to say, we can't patch this anymore. There's no more patches. We have to make a real change. That's why at the seminary, the seminary never set out to move. That was never our plan. We never set out to move. We spent $2 million trying to stay. We were trying to patch a 50-year-old campus and turn it into something we could use for 25 more years. Incremental change is good. But Jesus said, sometimes, you've washed that garment the last time. Patches won't do. Real change means what? Real change. And then the second principle, which you know more often, is this one, the wineskins. And that is major change requires new structures or new wineskins. Now, the word structure implies a building. That doesn't necessarily mean that. It can be a new budget, a new org chart, a new personnel manual, or a new building, but it means you have a new holder or a new structure. All right, let me ask you this. How many of you have ever worked for a company or a church that had a strategic plan? And that strategic plan was in a beautiful notebook, and it was presented and then put on a shelf and forgotten. Anybody ever had that happen to them in their company or their church? Sure. What happened? The plan was created, but there was no wineskin created to hold the new plan. And so nothing changed, did it? It's like if I was at the seminary and I went into a meeting and I said, all right, I'm president, and here's what I want to have happen. I want this done right over here. Well, because I'd been there a long time, the response would have probably been, yes, sir, let's make that happen. Sounds like a plan. And the first question a vice president would have asked would have been this: Mr. President, how much budgeted money are we going to put toward that? No money. All right. How many people are we going to assign to work on it? No staff. I just want it changed. What do you think is going to happen? Nothing. Because until I'm willing to change the structures, change the budget, and change the personnel plan, until I'm willing to change the structure to support what we're trying to do, nothing's going to happen. That's what this principle of the wineskins is about. You have to be willing to change the structure in order to make the change really happen. Okay, this is about how to preach and teach on leading major change. First, show models in the Bible, the Matthew model, the Pharisee model, the John's disciples model, and help people understand how these illustrate for us how people respond to change. Hear Jesus, follow him, that's the goal. But the Pharisees, too much is changing too fast. John's disciples, not enough is changing fast enough. And help people understand the challenge that we all face on these issues. And if possible, come up with your own humorous illustrations about how you have found yourself in either category so that people understand that we're all in this change together. Then, help them to see these two principles Jesus taught. We're making this change because we have tried every other way to solve this problem. We have incrementally solved it over the years this way, but we're out of options here. It's time for major change, no patches. Or, we've decided to make this change, and now we're changing the structure of our facility, or the structure of our budget, or the structure of our personnel policies, or the structure of our programs. We're changing our schedule. We're changing the wineskin so that it can hold the new change we're putting into place. That's how you preach and teach on this subject. All right, one model, just one. There's others in the book. You can look at those if you'd like. Now let's talk about this. How do you decide when major change is really needed? Now, sometimes people tell me, well, you know, I just know it in my heart. Well, good for you. I'm an intuitive leader also, and I sometimes know things in my heart. God impresses me, circumstances align around me, thoughts come into my mind that I've never had before. I understand how this works, but besides an intuitive feeling, you also need a strategic method to lead other people to embrace what you're sensing. So, over the years, I developed these 5 diagnostic questions. These came out of both my experience and my studies about how to diagnose if your organization or your church is ready for major change. Here the 5 questions are, and then I'm going to talk about each one for about 5 to 10 minutes. Number 1, is the change essential to the mission? Number 2, is there shared urgency about the change? Number 3, is relational trust high enough to sustain the change? Number 4, is the timing right for the change? And number 5, am I willing to see the change to completion? Now, I'm going to give you these, I'm going to go through them again in more detail in just a moment, but let's look at the 5 of them for just a moment, and let me give you some ways to use these questions. Number 1, use these questions in your private devotions and meditation and prayer about your church and your ministry, asking yourself these 5 questions. Second, use these questions in one-on-one conversations with your key leaders. As you're talking about a particular change, your deacons, your elders, your staff, whoever are your key leaders, sit down with them one-on-one and say, let's think about this change that we're considering, and let's see if we're really ready to make it together. And then third, you can use these questions in a group setting with your, again, staff, deacons, elders, however you're structured. You can use these in a group setting to guide a conversation about if you're really ready to make a major change. So this is a tool. It's not a, you don't, it's a tool to be used in various contexts. You personally, you one-on-one, you with a small group. Now, as you're working through these questions, let's go through them now in a little more detail. The first question is this. It's the question of essentiality. Is the change essential to the mission? Now, the next slide I'm about to put up is the single most important slide in this presentation. Here it is. Read it out loud with me. The only legitimate reason for major change Advancing the mission of your church organization as it serves God's mission. This is the most important slide. The only legitimate reason for major change is advancing the mission of your church organization as it serves God's mission. Now, I say it this way because not every Christian organization has as its mission the Great Commission. That's okay. That's the church's mission. I get that. But like at Gateway Seminary, our mission was not the Great Commission. We weren't baptizing anybody at a seminary. Our mission at the seminary was, as we said it, we shape leaders who expand God's kingdom around the world. That's what we do. We're the leader-shaping part of this movement. We don't send missionaries. We don't plant churches. We don't baptize anybody. We're not a church. We're not a mission board. We're a seminary. What's our role? We shape leaders who expand God's kingdom around the world. And we do that because we believe it serves God's mission of the Great Commission, the gospel for the nations. Everybody with me here? So if you're a church, you may see a great alignment between your church's mission and the overall mission of God. But if you're in a mission organization, like the brother that was up here earlier from Communio, I believe, their mission is more narrowly defined. Their mission is to strengthen families, particularly marriages, and by doing that, assist the church in accomplishing its mission. So that's why I phrase it this way. But the key thing for you to walk away from this slide remembering is this. If it's not about the mission, don't do it. What is wrong with us that we are burning up so much time, energy, money, and goodwill over things that don't advance God's mission? Here we go. What are some reasons or some problems that cloud the issue of making change for the right reasons? Here's one. Ego needs of leaders. I want a bigger auditorium. I want to preach in a nicer place. I want to be in a church that has a staff. So therefore, I'm going to make some change. That's not God's mission. That's your ego. Okay, got kind of quiet. I didn't mean to be mean right off the bat here. This is sad, isn't it, brothers and sisters? Ego. Here's another one. Comfort. I want it to be more comfortable. I want it to be like I like it. I want to change the worship style of our church. Why? Because I like a different kind of music. Well, what about the lost people in your community? What kind of music do they respond to when it's sung in their presence? And how do they sense God's moment, or a moment of worship with God in the middle of that singing? Well, I don't care about that. I want to sing the music I like. About your comfort. I want to build a new building. I want to have a staff. I'll give you two illustrations of this. I had a young guy come up to me. I know him pretty well, so I could be a little cheeky. You're thinking, well, you don't know us at all, and you're being kind of cheeky with us. But anyway, this guy came up to me and said, oh, Dr. Iorg, I finally got it done. I've been working on this for 2 years, but we got everything in order. We're going to hire an associate pastor. I said, that's great. Why? He said, well, take some of the work off of me and give up some of the things I don't like doing and just, man, make my life, just make my work just more, not easier. He said, just make things more workable for me. I said, okay. I hope you fail at that. He said, excuse me? I said, all right, I'm going to say it slower. I hope you fail at that. Now, as I said, I know this young man pretty well. He goes, Dr. Iorg, why would you say that? I said, because you're hiring for your comfort. Now, if you're hiring a staff person, you need to hire someone who's going to reach more people and make your life more difficult, not make it easier. You need to hire someone who will help you fulfill your mission, not serve you. And he said, man, I hadn't thought about it that way. I said, well, go back and rethink it. And then go hire somebody. You need more help. But you don't need help to make your life easier. It's not what comfort is about. Listen, everybody in this room that has any kind of larger organization at all, I know most of you are very small churches, but if you start hiring someone, let me tell you what it does. It makes your work more complicated. Nothing would have made my life at the seminary easier than if I just taught all the classes. They'd have all been perfect. Right? But 35 faculty who's saying who knows what in those classrooms every day, right? Made my life more complicated. But think about the impact they made by hiring 35 more faculty, right? So when you hire people, you hire for impact, for mission, not comfort. And then, classic example, I preached a building dedication at a church, and it was a beautiful facility. It was this church's first facility of their own. It was beautiful. About 5 years later, I went back. They had a whole new foyer. Everything in the foyer, everything's gone, everything rebuilt. I thought, I do not remember this way. So I said to one of the fellows, I said, hey, I was here for the dedication. I don't remember this foyer like this. He said, oh, no, we had to redo it. I said, oh, really, some disaster, something? He said, no, it just wasn't reaching people. I said, excuse me? He said, well, we just concluded that our foyer wasn't really conducive to people that, would come to our church, and they didn't feel like when they came in, they didn't feel the kind of warmth or the kind of connection that we wanted them to feel. And of course, I was being polite that day, and I didn't know this guy that well, so I wasn't as cheeky as I was to my young pastor friend, but I just said, okay, thank you. Brothers and sisters, let me tell you what. Right here in Des Moines, this is Friday, right? Okay, now tomorrow night, it's going to be cold, so I'm going to change the illustration a little bit. If I was in the summertime, I'd say tomorrow night there's going to be an old boy that just worked 55 hours at AutoZone. He's a parts man. Okay, he's married, got a couple little kids. He's sitting out on his patio tomorrow night drinking a beer, watching his kids play in a swimming pool from Walmart that they paid $8 for. Am I describing Des Moines, Iowa to you right now? Is this not the people that are out there? Do you honestly think that guy's sitting there with a beer in his hand, watching his kids play in a pool, talking to his wife after working a 55-hour shift at the AutoZone this week, and he's saying, if that Baptist church had a better foyer, I'd go down there one Sunday? Is there anybody who honestly believes that's how lost people think? I'm not talking about some consumer Christian. Let them go find their own church. I'm talking about lost people. Do you really think they're thinking about your foyer? Comfort needs. Brothers and sisters, if we're burning up all this energy on major change for ego and comfort, just stop. Just stop. And third, change that doesn't address the mission, but we fake it out like it does. Well, if we pave this parking lot, it's going to extend the mission. No, it's not. It's going to just make it less muddy when we park on Sunday, and it may be a good thing to do, but let's not make up stuff that isn't true. Let's just take care of business. The light bill has to be paid. The parking lot's got to have the snow scraped off of it. That's just part of the work. Let's just get it done. Okay. The most important thing to take from this presentation is this: essentiality. Is this change that we're thinking about really essential for the mission? And if it is, move forward. If it's not, just stop now. Just stop now. Number two. The second, Second, urgency. The second question is urgency. Is there shared urgency about the change? Now, without saying it out loud, I don't want to embarrass anybody, but look up at the question and imagine in your mind, what's the most important word in the question? The answer is shared. Shared. Here's why. You're the leader. Part of your responsibility is to see farther ahead than everyone else. You have urgency about something, and you wonder why no one else does, because they don't yet have shared urgency. This is normal, by the way. If you're a leader, you're always thinking ahead. You're always dreaming into the future. You're always seeing things other people don't see. You're probably the only person in your church, if you're in a small church, that's thinking about your church 24/7, 365. Most people are thinking about how to get their kids braces and how to get their lawn cut and how to get their car serviced and how to get their boss at their job to quit being such a jerk. That's what people are thinking about. But you're not. You're thinking about the church all the time. That's a good thing, by the way. But that's why when you start thinking about change, you start feeling a sense of urgency to get this done, and you first bring out the idea, and this is the response you get. Huh. Right? Am I talking honest here? People just look back at it like it. Really? What is wrong with you people? Can't you see it? No, they can't. So how do you get to shared urgency? Well, several steps. First, I'm getting it. Okay, number one, use accurate information about your ministry. Share accurate information about your ministry. And number two, share accurate information about your missional opportunities. Creating urgency starts with information. What do I mean by sharing accurate information about your ministry? I mean telling the truth about where you are. This is hard, especially if you've been there for a little while. Why? Because our ego, we don't want things that look badly on us to be shown out into public. That's why it's hard to say, I've been your pastor for 10 years, and here's how many people we baptized in the last 10 years by year. And this is not acceptable to me, and I wonder if it's acceptable to you. And the reason I'm proposing a dramatic change in our evangelism strategy for our church is because of this track record. And people will say, well, Pastor, I never even thought about it that way. I never looked at that data. I've never seen it. Now, that's just one example, but accurate data about baptisms, accurate data about attendance, accurate data about space and building use, accurate data about the costs associated with different programs. We're spending this much money for this result. Is that really what we want to be doing? Accurate information is hard to share because sometimes it doesn't look good. It doesn't reflect well on us as leaders. Brothers and sisters, go back to slide 1. It's about the mission, not about your ego and not about your comfort. And that's why you have to sometimes say, even if it doesn't make you look good, this is where we really are. And what I've learned over the years is, with some exceptions to the cranky people that we all have to deal with, when you give good people who are seriously seeking the Lord and want to do the right thing in their church the information like I'm describing, most of them will look at it the same way you do and say, that's a problem we need to deal with. Second, use accurate information about your missional opportunities. What's happening around us and what can we really do about it? So many illustrations about this, but I'll just tell you one. This illustration is probably 70 years old. But it happened to me when I was in seminary. My professor told me this story. He said, when I was a seminary student like you, I went to a country church on the weekends to preach. And I was an evangelistic preacher, and I was out there for a few weeks. And after I'd been there just a few weeks, the deacon said, Pastor, after service today, we want to talk with you. Don't be alarmed, nothing problem, but we just want to talk with you. He said, okay. So after service, he sat down with the deacons, and they said, Pastor, you're so zealous for evangelism, and we admire that so much. But you need to understand, you're going to get frustrated here because everybody in our county is a Christian. He said, really? They said, really? There might be somebody that's not, but this is a Christian county, and you're going to have a hard time here unless you understand that. You'll be frustrated. So he didn't say anything. He told us the story. He said, so the next couple of weeks later, we had a deacons meeting, and I'd put up a map of our county in the 2-mile, 3-mile square around our church, and I'd put red dots on it for every house. This was back before any kind of GPS or anything like that. He said, I've done the work, fellas, and here's all the houses in this 2 or 3 square miles around our church, every red dot. And I'd just like, you guys told me everybody in this county is a Christian. I just want to be sure. So this red dot right here, who lives there? Well, that's the Joneses. No, that's not the Joneses. Remember, they sold out and went back to be with their kids, and somebody else bought that place. Oh. So Pastor circled it. And after he'd circled about 4 or 5 houses, one of the deacons said, Pastor, just stop. I'll go visit every one of those houses with you next Saturday. Let's just go find out if they're Christians or not. And that little church, country church that had a county of everybody saved, the next year baptized just over 50 people who came to faith in Jesus. Now, that illustration has stuck with me all these years because here's a pastor in a small town, a weekend church from a seminary student who just said, wait a second, what are our true missional opportunities? And I'm not going to argue with you that everybody in your county is a Christian. I'm not going to try to change your mind. Let's just look at the data. The data is different. What are we going to do about that? Let's go do something about it together. Missional opportunities, ministry results, missional opportunities. Number 3, this is where you preachers can be helpful. A fresh consideration of God's mission and your church's mission, and your opportunity, and your organization's mission. Once you've started sharing accurate information about your ministry and sharing accurate information about your missional opportunities, now preach and teach on the possibilities. Preaching and teaching matters significantly this process, but in the context of sharing information that gives people the reason to think about why you're preaching and teaching on this topic. And then finally, the legitimate use of crises, both negative events and positive events. And that is creating urgency now. When something happens that's a significant crisis, it creates shared urgency. Probably my most dramatic example of this was the seminary, of course. The seminary was working behind the scenes on all of this land development, and then we took it public at the beginning of 2010, and we fought the battle from 2010 January to December of 2012. And on December 19th, 2012, we lost catastrophically at the Planning Commission meeting. 4-hour meeting, 300 people showed up to speak against us. It was worse than I can even describe to you today. That year cost us so much. It cost me my heart health, cost me my kidney health. I take 9 medications today, and it all started in January 2013 after living through that. It was a dark time. We had picketers in the streets, protesters protesting us in front of our campuses. This one had been going on now at this point for 3 years. And so when I stood up the following April and said, "Seminary community, today I am announcing that we have sold all of our property in Northern California. We are moving the seminary to Southern California, and we are relabeling ourselves as Gateway Seminary of the Southern Baptist Convention." Now, you're going to have a hard time believing what I'm about to say, but I've been saying it now for all these years, never been challenged. On the day that I announced that we were moving, there were 150 plus employees, 2,000 students. At that point, about 8,000 alumni. As I stand here today, I've not received one text message, one email, one phone call, had one personal conversation, or gotten a letter from anyone who is currently employed by or enrolled at the seminary in opposition to the relocation. Why? Because there was shared urgency. They had been watching for years the accurate information about our ministry, the missional opportunities that we had that we were not able to fulfill. I had been preaching and teaching about mission for years. And when the crisis of December 19th, 2012 happened, and it all came crashing down in the final meeting after 3 years of work, the seminary community knew something has to happen. We don't know what's going to happen, but something has to happen. And when the president stood up 15 months later, in April of 2014, and announced the sale, there was a sense of urgency and unity because everyone understood what was happening and what needed to happen. Number 3, the third question is trust, or the third issue is trust. And the question is relational trust high enough to sustain the change? Now, most of you believe this first part. Leaders must earn their followers' trust. And you know this, you've heard this taught in other conferences. You earn trust through serving people or through sacrificial service, and you earn trust by demonstrating competence. I could give you lots of illustrations about these things, but Jesus said, "The greatest among you is the servant of all." The person with the most influence is the one who serves. You gain trust by serving. I'll just illustrate it this way. This is how decisions get made in Baptist churches. You stand up on Sunday morning and say, "This is what needs to happen." And your church family looks at you and says, "Huh, okay." And a husband and wife are sitting there, and she's thinking to herself, "I wonder what my husband thinks about this, and I wonder what we should do about this." And they go home, and they have lunch, and they mess around all afternoon, and they get the kids in bed that night, and the husband and wife get in the bed. And she says to him, "Hey, this morning when Pastor said we need to build a building or start a second service or move to a new location or reformat our missions program or retool our budget to heavily emphasize evangelism, what did you think of that?" And here's what her husband says. "Well, I had a lot of questions about it, and it's going to cost us a lot if we do that. But you know, when my dad died, Pastor drove 200 miles to sit with me in the hospital and then came back 2 days later and did the funeral. And when that knucklehead boy down the hall got in trouble in high school, Pastor went with me to get him out of jail that night. So I guess if he thinks that's what God wants us to do, I guess I'm with him." Do you understand that's how decisions get made in Baptist churches? People decide if they trust you, they'll follow you. That's what they decide. And they decide they'll trust you if you've served them with competence. Now, most of us get this part. Relational trust has to be high enough to sustain the change. Now, I didn't know this when I went to my first church, and I started proposing change too quickly, and then I got rejected, and I backed off from that, and I started going a different path. But after I'd been there about 3 or 4 years, and we had that meeting I just told you about earlier about deciding if we were going to go to that second service, we were finally ready to do that. Now I look back on it, and I realize that part of the delay was that the people were wondering, could they really trust me to get this done? But after 3 or 4 years, they decided they could. Now, let me say something to you guys in here that are older. Listen to me now. This issue of trust being gained by sacrificial service and demonstrated competence, it also has a cumulative effect in your life. You know, I'm 67 years old now. I went to the Executive Committee at the Southern Baptist Convention. I was 65. I'm not going to spend 5 years trying to gain their trust. Okay? Now, I'm not being arrogant about this. I'm just saying, if at this point in my life I haven't demonstrated sacrificial service and demonstrated competence to Southern Baptists enough that they would entrust me with this role and people would follow me in it, it's never going to happen. Are you tracking with me? So I have an accumulated sense of trust that people have placed in me. If you've been a leader for a while and you go to a new assignment or you are tasked with a new responsibility, just lead. But those of you that are younger, it's not a reflection on your leadership or your lack of that people don't fully trust you yet to follow you into a major change. You just may need to give them a little more time. All right? Now, there's no formula for this. It's a sliding scale. So I'll just say it this way. The younger you are, the more you have to work on this to gain the trust of people before you introduce a dramatic change into their lives. Maybe the older you are and the more you've accumulated a service and competence reputation, the more rapidly you can move to make these changes. Making sense to you? Okay. I got no time for 15 illustrations, but I got 10 more I could give you. All right, here we go. But here's the second part of this. Not only must that relational trust must be high enough, you have to earn your followers' trust, but get the second statement, and that is you must decide if you trust your followers. And what I mean by that is this. Major change typically, in my experience, takes 2 to 5 years to implement. Are you willing to make that kind of commitment to your followers? Do you trust them enough to give them 5 more years of your life? That's sobering, isn't it? So the statement, is relational trust high enough, means it cuts both ways. You have to earn your followers' trust, and you certainly have to have theirs as well. Number 4, timing. Is the timing right for the change? Now, the hard reality is, as I've already said, leaders often see the need for change long before their followers. Long before their followers. When I went to my first church, I drove off of I-29 onto a 4-lane feeder road, turned onto a 2-lane asphalt road, and turned onto a 2-lane gravel road, and there I found the Baptist church. And I thought to myself, the first day I pulled into the parking lot for the interview, why aren't we located 1 mile over there at the intersection of the 4-lane and the freeway? What are we doing back here? Now, even then, I was smart enough not to bring that up in the interview. But I saw it from the first day. And it wasn't until 5 years later that we finally got around to talking about it and buying the 10 acres over there. Guess where? At the corner of that intersection was where we bought the land. Now, I saw it a long time before they did. That's normal. All of us who are in leadership see things that are needed to change a long time before our followers. And as you already know, you've heard this in other seminars, the challenge for most leaders is to stay in step with God's timing, not to run ahead. But now I want to give you the other side of this one as well. And the other side of this one is this last statement. and that is you must have the courage to move decisively when the time is right. You must have the courage to move decisively when the time is right. Is the timing right for the change? Yes. You have to stay in step with God's timing, and yes, you have to be sure that you're not rushing ahead because you saw it before everyone else did. But when the moment is presented to you, you have to have courage. One of the most dramatic examples of this happened years ago while I was at the seminary. We were in the process of relocating. At the old campus, we owned something called a missions house, which an IMB person came and lived on campus every year during their stateside assignment and interfaced with our missions fellowship, mentored seminary students who were thinking about missions, and headquartered their year of stateside off our campus. It was a beautiful process. Moving to Southern California, we wanted to replicate that at our new location, and because we were selling everything and buying new, of course we had the money to do that, but no seminary president worth his salary ever misses an opportunity to do a little fundraising, you know what I'm saying? And I thought, this is the kind of project that our donors, some of them might really like to participate in. There was one particular donor that I thought might, so I wrote him an email, believe it or not. Now, I know this couple pretty well. These are the kind of people that if I showed up at their house to ask them for money, they'd say, why did you waste money on a plane ticket? Just call us next time. That's the kind of people they are. So I sent them an email and said, I've got this idea, and I laid it out for them, and I'd like to ask you if I could make an appointment to come over and talk to you about this. They emailed me back. I can quote the email. Pretty much one sentence. It said, Dear Jeff, the answer is yes. Come pick up the check and we'll tell you a story. Oh, I forgot to tell you, in the original email I said I'd like to ask you for $500,000 to buy this house and a car to go with it and set up an account to take care of its maintenance and all of that. And they said, the answer is yes. Come see us. Come get the check and we'll tell you a story. Well, about 3 weeks later, I'm there. And I said, well, you said you had a story. And he said, yeah, we do. It's a sad story, really. He said, our church planted a church. We went with the church plant. We've been there for a while. The church has done well. Now it needs to move into a facility. We found one. It's a facility that we could convert into a church building for a while. When we get to about 200 people, we'll have to move out, but it's the kind of thing you can sell pretty easily. So we want to buy it, use it, sell it as we're progressing along as a church. I said, that's a great plan. He said, yeah, I thought so. We worked on it. I told the pastor, raise all the money you can to buy this building. And when you've raised all the money you can in the church, because I want everybody to have a part in this, then come see me and I'm going to pay the difference. We're going to pay cash for this. They got into the meeting. The pastor said, this is the building. This is what it cost. It's a lot, but I know we can do it. And some people in the church in the meeting started speaking negatively and saying they couldn't do it, we couldn't afford it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And rather than the pastor saying, all right, we understand your concerns, let's come back to it, rather than trying to address those issues, which he knew the answer was, we can definitely afford it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Fast version of the story. In the meeting, the pastor said, I didn't expect there to be opposition to this, and so I'm going to pull this proposal off the table, and we're going to go a different direction. My friend was sitting there in the service. He's like, you're doing what? The next day, he went to see the pastor and said, what happened to you yesterday? He said, well, I don't like conflict, and I didn't want to have conflict about a building, and I don't want to have a division about this. He said, there was no division. You have the money. I told you I would pay the whole building off. I know that, but I still don't want division about it. So 2 or 3 days later, I sent my email to this pastor, not knowing the story. I sent my email. And I went to see him, and he said, so here's the deal. Here's a check for $500,000. And I'm giving it to you because I trust you, and you will do something that makes a difference with it. Now, I was sad to get that gift in one regard because I knew where it was supposed to have gone. But here's the deal. The timing is right. You've got to have the courage to stand up and do what has to be done. And if there's a little conflict, you're going to have to weather that. If there's some meetings, you're going to have to go have them. Whatever it takes, you've got to do it because both sides of this equation fit. The timing is right. Go slow, slow, slow until God says green light, and then you got to go, go, go. Make sense? All right. And then last, completion. Am I willing to stay until the change is finished? You got to stay till it's over, and you've got to recognize when it's really over. Meaning that you have to allocate your emotional energy to stay until the new normal is established, and you have to allocate emotional and physical energy for the duration of the project. Now, I want to illustrate this a couple of ways, and then I'm going to wrap it up. Most people who lead change, most people who experience change don't understand when it starts and when it really ends. They only see the middle part. So the seminary's relocation actually started in 2010 when we proposed the renovation of our old campus, rebooted in 2013 when we were turned down at the end of 2012 and started 2013 looking for new options. And then 2014, I made the public announcement of the relocation. And then 2016, the seminary actually picked up and in 5 weeks went from one location to another and were fully open and operational. What a 5-week summer that was. Now, when we opened the seminary in the new location, and then we got to the new location, and when we opened it in July, and we started school in late August, and we went through that next academic year in our new location. Now, if I tell you that story, when did the change begin? It started in January of 2010 when we launched the public effort to redevelop our campus, and it ended at graduation in 2017 when the first class graduated on the new campus. That's the duration that I had to stay for, the 7 years. However, most people from the outside only saw the change as what happened while we were actually moving. And I saw that because when we moved to Southern California, after we got open in July, I blocked out the rest of the month of July to be a tour guide, basically. I just worked the foyer of the new building, and people were coming every day to see it. And I just greeting people, showing them around, giving tours, talking to folks. And it was a pretty fun 2 or 3 weeks of doing that. I must have heard this 100 times. Man, I'll bet you're glad this is over. Well, I knew what they meant. I was being kind then. I wasn't trying to give a leadership seminar, so I would just smile and say, yes, thank you. But I knew it wasn't over. You see, in 2013, when we were getting ready to publicly launch all of this move, I pulled our vice presidents together and I said, listen, this is what needs to happen. Once I make this announcement, it's going to be a challenging year or so until we get ready to move. But then when we get to the actual move part, 2014, 15, and 16, there's not going to be any time off. Now, you can find a weekend here or a couple days here. I'm not talking about that. But there's not going to be any 2- and 3-week vacations like we normally have in the summers and those kind of things as a school. We're going to be so overwhelmed, we're going to all have to be here. And they said, I get that. And I said, so take care of yourself. Over this 2-year window when we're actually moving, get a weekend here, a day off there, but take care of yourself, but recognize we're going to have to really stay with this. And then when we get to the new location, there's going to be a big exhale, but we're not going to be able to do that. Because this change is about the mission. And when we get to the new campus and we open, all we will have proved is we know how to unpack moving boxes. But when we get to the first graduation, that's when we will be able to say, we fulfilled our mission of shaping leaders to expand God's kingdom around the world in our new location successfully and graduated the first class. That's when we're going to exhale and we're all going to take time off. This is the arc of change. This is what most people see. You have to commit to the big arc. A few years ago, I came across this research that really startled me. Do you know that churches that build a new auditorium, 50% of the pastors who build a new auditorium leave within 18 months after it's constructed? Look back over your experience of ministry and see how many pastors you know that built a building and then left. Why? Because they got confused that building a building was their mission. And when they got it finished, they thought they were done. But your mission is not finished until you've built the building and it's being used successfully to accomplish the mission for which God designed it, right? And that's when you say, we finally got it done. Here's the building program. Here's the arc of change. And leaders have to be willing to stay, look at the screen, until the new normal is established. And you have to allocate physical, emotional, and spiritual energy for the whole process, not just the little bit that people see. Making sense? All right. So, these are the 5 questions. I think I have them at the end. I do not. Those are the 5 questions. Essentiality. Is the change essential for the mission? If the answer is no, stop it. If the answer is yes, then move on to the next question. Urgency. Is there shared urgency about the change? If the answer is yes, keep moving. If the answer is no, then stop and start sharing information about mission and missional opportunities and ministry results, and start preaching and teaching and waiting for crises to arise that push you along in that missional change. Urgency, wait for it. And then third, is there relational trust high enough? Do you trust the people, and do the people trust you? Is that ready for change? And then next, oh, he got him up there. Good, excellent. And then 4, is the timing right for the change? Have I been waiting, but now God has green-lighted us? It's time to go, go, go. And then finally, am I willing to see the change to completion? Am I willing to stay here until we really get this change implemented? Not just the day we open the second service, but the day the second service is a full functioning part of the mission that we're accomplishing here. Not just the day the new budget is adopted, but the day that new budget affects us for 2 years and changes the evangelism strategies of our church. Not just the day that we finally hired a youth pastor, but the day that youth pastor is successfully accomplishing the mission of our church and showing everyone that that's exactly what we intended from the beginning, and now it's fully operational in who we are. It's the full picture that you have to measure as a leader when you're thinking about staying to the completion. Use these tools, these questions for personal reflection, use them for one-on-one conversation, and use them in a group of leaders who talk about these things to see where you are. And friends, when you get 5 green lights, go. But if any one of these is blinking yellow, stop and work on it. And if any one of them is blinking red, stop entirely until you get it moving in the right direction. All right? All right. Thank you for letting me come by today, and thanks for letting me teach you on this. I wrote the book, Leading Major Change in Your Ministry, if you really want to know a lot more about this. And if you want to know more about the seminary story, it's in the book in more detail as well. So thanks. Tim, thank you.